This week we're going to be focusing on analysing the legal problem. In other words, what we're doing is focusing on framing your research question, identifying what your research question will be, what the scope of your project is, so that we can make sure that your research is narrow and focused on the issue that you're going to explore. Let's have a look at that in more detail. Now, it's really important that you have a look at the study guide for this week because it is focused on helping you define your topic. In essence, what we're really talking about here is how do we identify a research question within the scope of this law reform topic. Obviously, the law reform topic is broad. It's looking at lots of potential different issues and areas that could be improved, but you need to identify one narrow area of that law reform project and hone in on that. You need to get a general overview of that particular area of the law. So you need to understand how it operates, where the problems are, and gain an overall working knowledge of that particular area. That will then enable you to understand the debates that are ongoing in that area and the proposals for reform. At that point, once you've got that working knowledge, you need to concentrate on the debate so that you can identify the contentious issues within that particular area. At that point, you are then able to start narrowing down what you will be looking at, what you won't be looking at, so that you can identify your research question. So let me just give you a very basic example. If you identify the area as consumer contracts, you don't want to find out everything that there is to know about consumer contracts. You don't want to engage in a research process that looks at everything there is to know about consumer contracts. It's just way too large. You're going to spend all your time researching and probably still not have identified everything. Now, nor do you want to find out everything you need to know about consumers who contract with businesses online, because again, it's still too broad, okay? Think of all the scenarios in which consumers contract every day online, from your iTunes accounts and Google Play accounts through to Spotify, through to buying things on eBay, buying things through sales carts, or signing up to subscriptions. The scope of that is huge and it's still too broad. So you need to narrow it down and focus on a problematic area within the consumer business online sale field. So there you might start to concentrate on standard terms and conditions that we have to tick and buy the product, or not tick and not be able to buy the product. That might be a way of narrowing it down, but that's still way too broad. Think of all the things that terms and conditions cover, still not going to be narrow enough. So what aspects within those terms and conditions might be problematic? Well, you could start to look at things such as what happens when things go wrong, when consumers want to sue or they want a refund. What about when they want to sue? What happens if there's a jurisdiction clause in that consumer contract that says that they have to sue where the defendant is based? Well, what happens if the consumer is in Queensland and the defendant is based in WA? So maybe that one very small term and condition, maybe that could be the area of focus. That's the kind of precision that we're talking about here. You need to keep drilling down each time, narrowing the field of inquiry until you identify a research topic. And then from there, you need to then turn it into a question or an area of exploration. So through this process of getting a general overview and then starting to identify the issues within that particular area, that process really helps you identify potential stakeholders, the different sides of the debate, and the proposals for change. All of those are going to be really useful when it comes to researching and writing your thesis. They will give you a springboard for the writing process, and they will link to further sources in the research process as well. So it's not wasted time, and it does mean that you're starting already to gather evidence that may support your arguments later on. Note that an important part of finding your research question is actually identifying what you're leaving out, what you won't cover. So if we're looking at civil surveillance, we may decide that We're going to not look at drones, the use of drones, but we are going to focus on facial recognition software. Now, when we're looking at facial recognition software, we might want to then narrow that down to where it's being used to process payment, for example. So in China at the moment, it's possible to pay for your McDonald's with facial recognition rather than your credit card. So what we're doing is we're identifying what it isn't, then we're identifying the topic of interest, and then we're honing in within that. Now, it's important that you find something that is really important to you, that you find engages your interest. Please make sure that you're really thinking strategically here about what topic's really going to interest you, what do you want to find out more about, and really look at the different sides of the debate concerning that particular topic. So once you have obtained your general overview of the area, identified the contentious issues, worked out which issue you'd like to focus on, you still have to narrow it down to a research question. Now, don't panic if you're not able to do that just yet. Just try and narrow the scope of your project down as much as possible, and hopefully the question will occur to you after you've engaged in more reading, because through the reading process you'll identify some of the questions that are arising out of that particular area, and you can then start to focus on the one that appeals the most to you. One of the things that you can do to help you identify your research question is to have a look at the list of questions in the study guide for this week. You can use those as a springboard for identifying an area of focus or a particular angle on the topic of interest. Note though that you really need to avoid what's known as the show and tell, which is really just presenting everything that others have said about that particular topic. Sometimes it can be just one-sided, sometimes it can actually look at both sides of the debate, but not actually engage in any analysis of that at all. What we're really looking for you to do is to formulate an argument. Now, that can involve looking at both sides of the debate carefully, but then reaching your own view and indicating why. What's your basis for that? What sources do you use in support? Or alternatively, you can take a particular perspective, but you must still address the other side's comments and rebut those with well-reasoned logical analysis. So remember that you must engage in analysis as part of the project. Just listing everything that you know about that is not going to be enough. And that's why the question is important, because when you start to frame something as a question, you really start to hone in on an argument or a perspective or answering the question. And that's where that prompts the analysis. That's where the analysis comes in. One final tip for today. I hope that you've already started your research process so that you can at least obtain a general overview of the area and identify the contentious issues. Final tip is I want you to think about research strategy. You need to think more broadly than just looking at legislation and cases on the topic. What information is relevant? The study guide talks about wicked problems that can't just be solved by one discipline working on it. It needs a combination of different disciplines to produce a solution. So for example, creating a series of rules about the speed that we can travel at on the roads hasn't prevented speeding. So something more than that is needed. It's the same with drink driving. The law on its own is quite often not enough. We need to understand that we're in a complex society, and that means that we need complex interventions and complex solutions. So when thinking about what sources you will gather, remember that you will need to look not just at primary sources but secondary sources. And when looking at secondary sources, you might want to be looking at data and interdisciplinary materials as well as legal sources. Note that data from government websites and websites from a range of organizations such as World Health Organization and the UN might also have relevant information for your particular topic.